As of 2026, the format for the UCAS personal statement has changed. And honestly, most of your teachers and counselors are probably still trying to work out what it all means. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you the exact strategy that admissions officers are actually looking for to help you get into your dream university. Because here's the harsh reality. Admissions officers are reading through thousands of personal statements, and yours really needs to stand out in order for you to stand a chance at the top universities. Okay, this video has been a long time in the making. And I think it's a really important one, probably one of the most important videos I'll make on this channel, because the personal statement is one of the few pieces of data that many universities will have about you, especially if they don't do interviews or an admissions exam. So you really want to make it as good as possible. I'll show some snippets of my own personal statement in this video, which helped me get accepted into Imperial College London, which is currently ranked as the #1 university in Europe. My next video will be a deep dive into my actual personal statement. It was written for the old format, but I do think that you can pick up a lot from the style and the tone of my writing, as well as what kind of super and extracurriculars I did and didn't mention. Stay tuned for that and subscribe if you want to keep updated. Final thing, if you find this video useful and you want me to give you some personalized feedback line by line on your personal statement, then I'm offering personal statement feedback for just £18, and you can see the Google Forms in the description for more information about that if you're interested. It's really important to understand the purpose of the personal statement before you even start planning it. And that is to show your enthusiasm and potential to study a certain course. You don't have to know it all already, and in fact, you're not supposed to. That's what you're going to university for. As long as you have a clear interest and they've seen that you've taken initiative to do something to learn more about your subject, doing projects or further reading, which we'll get into later, that is kind of what the personal statement's all about. So I would suggest submitting your personal statement as early as possible, because this really eases off your pressure for your A-levels. If you have admissions exams and interviews, you have a lot less pressure and a lot less time commitment to writing this long essay that you need to kind of perfect. So try and get it in as soon as possible, especially if you're applying to Oxbridge, or for I think the medicine courses, you have to apply early. Make sure you leave plenty of time, and you should try and get it in, or try and get it basically completed about a week before your school wants it in. And remember, your school probably wants it in earlier than the UCAS deadline, so it'll be a bit further back, but it gives you more time to refine it and remove any mistakes. So what are the changes from 2026? Well, in the past, the personal statement has just been a single box where you write 4,000 characters as a maximum, and that was it. Now they're changing it to 3 questions, and each question has a minimum of 350 characters, and in total, all of your writing across the 3 questions can also still be a maximum of 4,000 characters. The purpose of this is to make it less daunting to start writing your personal statement, because just seeing a blank page and being told to write 4,000 characters is kind of a scary task. So it's supposed to help you and not be restrictive. The actual content of the personal statement is the exact same as all the previous years. Full disclosure, I think UCAS did a pretty rubbish job with coming up with these 3 questions. They're not very well phrased and they overlap quite a lot. But what are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do, huh?
I'm gonna tell you what UCAS has said officially in their guidance, mainly taken from a guidance video that I will link in the description that they put out themselves. And also I'll be telling you what I personally think about how I would approach the personal statement this year. So the first question is, why do you want to study this course or subject? This question is all about your motivation for picking this particular subject. And this can actually be quite difficult to think of ideas for, especially if you've wanted to study, let's say, law for many years, maybe since you were a kid. It can be kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what made you like it in the first place. You guys have said that your motivation could have been a role model, a particular event in your life, and they want you to share your knowledge in the subject area itself. Maybe you have some insight from further reading, or maybe you watched a TED Talk, and then they want you to think about those activities you've done outside the classroom which will evidence your passion. In this question, you definitely want to be bringing in your supercurriculars. Now, what's a supercurricular versus an extracurricular? Well, a super or co-curricular, which mean the same thing by the way, is any activity that extends your knowledge of the subject beyond the specification. So it extends or goes completely separate from your A-level or GCSE specification, probably your A-level. For example, you could have read a book, watched a lecture, done a project, whatever it is. It's not in the spec, but it is related to the subject as a whole. An extracurricular is any activity completely unrelated from your academics that shows that you're an all-rounded individual. So for example, like your hobbies. So definitely don't talk about your non-academic like extracurriculars in this section, like instruments, language learning, sports, etc. Unless obviously you're applying for one of those courses, in which case you should. But this is all about your academics and about your subject. Why did you pick this subject? There are a couple of things that you definitely don't want to say in this section. You don't want to say that you're applying because it pays really well. Even if that's the real reason, don't talk about it. They won't like that. Don't say that you're applying just because your parents do the same thing or your parents tell you to do it or the parents are making you do it. That's even worse. They won't like that either. And also don't say that you've just been interested from a young age. Like that's too vague. You want to try and be specific about what exactly got you into it. Even if it's not like 100% accurate. You don't want to say that something cliche like I got my first computer at age 3 and since then I've known that I want to study computer science at university. I mean, they're not going to believe that. Now, in terms of ratios, I've seen people say different things about how they'll split their characters across 3 questions. Some people have said that they'll put most of their personal statement in the first question and leave less for the second and third. But especially since this is the first year of this new structure, it's really hard to know what unis actually want. And to be honest, until we hear back, we can't know what they want. Having said that, I think it really does not matter how you're allocating the characters. Honestly, as long as you have all the content that you want to mention, it shouldn't matter too much which heading it comes under because your unis will be reading all of them anyway. You definitely don't have to write equal amounts or anywhere near equal amounts for the 3 questions. That's why we have a minimum character count of 350. If you were to split it completely evenly, it would be about 1,300 characters per question. But again, you don't need to do that. So for that first question, you want to talk about what exactly inspired you and how that made you want to study the subject for yourself. Maybe you want to explore it even further. Maybe you want to contribute to some research. Whatever it is, that's the place to write about it. The second question is, how have your qualifications and studies helped you prepare for this course or subject? And I think this question is about the more formal supercurriculars that you've done and obviously what you've learned from them. My first thought was, what exactly do they mean by qualifications? Do these have to be like the school qualifications, A-levels and GCSEs, or can there be other stuff too? But I think it becomes a lot clearer when you read the guidance that they've given in their YouTube video. Again, I'll link it in the description. They say, this is your chance to shout about the relevant or transferable skills you have gained from your formal education and highlight your understanding of how they will help you succeed in this subject area. Think about how your studies or training relate to your choices, whether it be your current school or college, so GCSEs, A-levels, whatnot, any online course. So if you've done an MOOC, which stands for a massive open online course, which is usually like a free course you can do online and get a certificate out of, or any form of education that you have undertaken. So that's a bit broader. They then say, consider what relevant or transferable skills you have from your studies and how they may have helped you develop the skills required at university or college. So clearly this section is more about the formal supercurriculars as well as your school qualifications like GCSEs and A-levels. Now, in my opinion, I wouldn't really go into your GCSEs at all. And I wouldn't go really into much depth into your A-levels and what you've learned from them either. There is a caveat though. And the reason I wouldn't go into A-levels too much is because, especially for a competitive course, loads and loads of other applicants are doing the exact subject that you're probably talking about. Let's say you're applying for computer science and you start talking about what you learned from computer science, the A-level, then you're not going to exactly stand out. You could talk about how you learned X, Y, and Z from doing a certain A-level, but surely anyone doing the same A-level and achieving a good grade would also have developed those same skills. So I wouldn't go too much into that. The only caveat is that if you learn something at A-level and you realize, oh, this is really interesting, but we don't go into too much depth at A-level, I want to learn it further, in which case you went and did your own research, you watched a lecture, you did a project, then it's totally cool. If it's a STEM for other supercurriculars that you did, that's totally fine. But saying that I learned this at A-level and it gave me this skill, in my opinion, that's too basic. You're not going to stand out. And then specifically, UCAS then says that they're looking for educational achievements such as academic competitions, and student ambassador responsibilities. So if you do any of those, definitely mention them. Again, you don't want to be listing, but I'll get into the writing style and how you actually write the personal statement in a little bit. The third and final question is, what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? This question, I think, is more about the less formal supercurriculars and also the extracurriculars that you've done. So I wouldn't really put your extracurriculars in any of the other two questions. And again, in my personal statement, around 15% of the character count was spent on extracurriculars. I wouldn't suggest going above 15%, especially if you're applying to Oxbridge. Then you definitely don't want to be going above 15%. Some people even go to 10% or even slightly lower. So again, your personal statement, unlike the US, which is totally different, you want to be talking a lot about what you do outside of school, completely unrelated to academics, showing that you're a well-rounded person. The UK system is basically just academic. They want to see how prepared you are to study that subject at university. So UCAS says they want to see any other activities that you feel may be useful or interesting for the university or college to know. The way that they phrase this makes it sound like they're looking for mainly extracurriculars, but again, it becomes clearer with their official guidance, which lists work experience, employment or volunteering, personal life experiences or responsibilities, hobbies and any extracurricular activities, and any other achievements that you want to mention. So again, they're talking about extracurriculars in that second last bullet point, but they also mention work experience, which would probably be related to your subject. So it's a bit of a mix. It doesn't hugely matter, whether you put something, if you're not sure about whether to put a certain achievement in question 1, 2, or 3, but focus this question mainly on your extracurriculars and your less formal supercurriculars. I would put your extracurriculars right at the end because they are the least important. Okay, now my actual advice on how to write the personal statement, and this is super crucial. The first thing you want to do is read and analyze example personal statements. It helps you understand what kind of information to include and what to not include, as well as how to write effectively. I would recommend using stuff like the Student Room, which is what I used a lot. I think Uni Admissions is a great website as well that has some examples. You can even ask people that you know. If you know anyone personally who has done that course, then you could ask them. You could even reach out to people on LinkedIn and ask for advice. Maybe even ask to see their personal statement if they're willing to share it with you. As you're preparing to write, you want to collect every application that you've ever written, if you still have access to them. So when I was applying for work experiences and programs and for prefects and everything in year 12 and year 13, and even before that actually, I would always just save it in my Google Drive in case in the future I would need that information. And what I did before I started writing my personal statement is I collected all that information and I made a long list of all the stuff that I've done. So whether it was like achievements or like a project I had done, I would write it all down. You want to write absolutely everything you can think of, even if it sounds like it might not be fully relevant. Write it down, you can filter through later. You want to make a separate list for your supercurriculars and your extracurriculars. Next, split your list into subsections. So you can see on screen now, I split my list, I color coded it with blue for computer science, red for maths, and green for all the extracurriculars. And this helped me get an idea of, okay, I need to balance having more supercurriculars for computer science and less for maths and stuff like that. Next, and this is a piece of advice I've never heard anyone give, but I think it's really underrated, which is to send your reference writing teacher a short list of your achievements that you couldn't fit into your personal statement. I mean, this is after you've written your personal statement, but I guess once you've written your personal statement and you tick off all the stuff on your list that you were able to mention, there'll be stuff that you probably didn't have space to mention because you only have 4,000 characters. So what you're going to do is write maybe an email to your teacher or see them in person. Whoever's writing your reference, you want to make them aware of the achievements that you have so that they don't just talk about your school achievements. Like one of my teachers in school actually asked us to all submit like a short document with some stuff that we had done, because otherwise, like, how are they going to know what to actually talk about in the reference? It's just a great thing, makes your reference even stronger, because your unis will all be seeing that too, and they'll be assessing you based off your reference too. The next thing is honesty and accuracy. When you're making this list, don't lie or try not to exaggerate about what you've done, because especially if you have an interview, you will be caught out. Make sure you also know your stuff. If you have an interview for any of your universities, maybe you do medicine or maybe you're applying for an Oxbridge, make sure you can hold like a substantial conversation about every single point on your personal statement, because they may well go into it. Make sure you have it fresh in your mind before your interview. But yeah, this is stuff I'll talk about in like a separate video about interviews. Now, when you're writing this list of your achievements, make sure that if you're applying for a joint course, like joint maths and computing is offered by Imperial, try to strike a balance between each of the subjects. You don't want to have like 90% about just maths and then 10% on computing, or vice versa. Whatever joint honors degree you're trying to apply for, try and strike an approximate balance. It does not have to be 50-50. Try and show that you've got some substantial evidence for both of those subjects. If you're applying for different subjects at different universities, then try to cater equally to each. Remember, if you're applying for a really specialized course at one of those universities, for example, Warwick has the Morse degree, which is like mathematics, operational research, statistics and economics, then they don't necessarily expect your personal statement to be tailored to their course, because they know you're applying to other things as well. And you can see on screen now Warwick's actual advice about personal statements for that degree. And you can see that they are accepting, and they understand that you'll probably be applying for other degrees. As long as you show a primary interest in the subjects that make up that degree, like maths, for example here, then it should be totally fine. Now, when you're writing your personal statement, you need to have quite a specific writing style and tone, and your writing needs to flow. Most importantly, you can't just write about what you've done or what you've learned about or whatever it is. You have to really go into your personal opinion on it, what you learned from it, why it was valuable, or how it inspired you to then go on and do something else. Some of the most impressive personal statements don't necessarily have the most impressive feats or fancy achievements and competitions. They just really clearly talk about the impact of what they've done on them. Especially what I mentioned about something inspiring you to do something else. That is what I like to call like a chain. Looking for and creating chains are super important in your personal statement. The whole piece of writing will just be a series of many different chains. This is where you link one activity to the next. For example, doing X led me into reading about Y, which then led me into exploring Z further. And you want to follow this template throughout your personal statement for each of the different sections. Now, within these chains, you want to talk about the challenges and obstacles that you came across while you were doing these activities, because it just won't be believable if you say that, you know, this went completely swimmingly, I did this project and it was totally fine. They want to see that you struggled, because they want to see how you adapt to face those difficulties and how you can overcome them. Here's an example from the introduction of my own personal statement, which links like a series of experiences. I'll leave it on screen now. You can pause if you want to read it. But yeah, basically linking between robotics, and then I went to do a competition, and then I went on to do something else. And I'm trying to make it all cohesive and flow together. Because otherwise it just feels like you're listing a bunch of experiences and it's not very impactful. And you can see right at the end, I even talked about this exposure to practical problem solving reinforced my commitment to studying a degree in computer science. So really bringing it home that I want to study a degree in computer science. I'm not just doing this for fun. I want to go even further, and that it provides a platform for me to innovate at scale. And final point about this, you don't need to create chains for your extracurriculars. They can just be almost like a list, pretty much. But I would say you should also talk about the impact of your extracurriculars very briefly. Like, I did sports at this competitive level and this taught me resilience or whatnot. But you don't need to make chains about you did this and then you did that. Just keep it simple, keep it brief. Again, extracurriculars are not that important in the UK, at least. Throughout writing your personal statement, you need to remember you're answering the question of what do you think. When you're talking about how you read a certain book or you watched a lecture, the universities don't need you to then go on to describe what the book or lecture was about. They don't care. In fact, if they did care, they would probably go and read the book themselves. Instead, they want to know your opinion, and this applies especially for, I guess, humanities subjects. So try and give your own take on whatever literature you've read up on, because that shows that you're really thinking critically, and maybe even lightly criticize or disagree with some particular aspect of it, because that shows that you're really thinking and you're really bringing your own mind into the work that you've read. The next thing with writing style is to avoid cliches. As I mentioned before, like, I've been interested in this subject since I was young. Like, it's a bit boring and plain and a bit of a cliche. Again, making it more specific is what you really want to try and do. Avoid cringe introductions. This is not English persuasive writing. It's not like an opinion piece in a newspaper. Just keep it professional. That's what they're really looking for. No generic statements, nothing like that. And I'll go into the introduction for my personal statement in the next video. Now, when you're writing about the stuff that you've done, you've achieved all these different things, it's important to balance your tone between confidence and humility. You don't want to come across as cocky because, as I mentioned before, you're going there to study. You're meant to just show that you're enthusiastic. You don't want to show that you know it all, because that's not what they're looking for. Remember, the admissions team has likely never met you or even spoken to you, so their impression of what you're like as a person is formed entirely based off of your personal statement. So you want to sound almost like a professor's dream student to teach, even if you have to slightly exaggerate your interest in the subject for the purposes of getting into the university. You basically want to sound like you're this guy. The next section is about the iterative process of writing your personal statement. Once you've written your first draft, you need to get feedback, improve your draft, and then repeat again and again and again. When you're writing a personal statement, you will have many versions. I think I had at least like 16, 17, 18 different versions before I got one that I was actually completely happy with. And your first few versions, by the way, will not be good. So when you go to your teacher or whoever it is to get feedback and they say, "Oh, I'm not so sure about this," just don't be disheartened, because your first few versions are not going to be good, but it's actually not a huge amount of work once you pinpoint what you need to improve to then get something that looks really professional and really impressive. Out of all the time I spent working on my personal statement, it was probably only about 10% or even less of that time which I spent writing my first draft. The other 90% or even more was actually cutting characters, rephrasing, refining. And sometimes you need to get creative with how you remove characters, trying to use shorter synonyms and stuff like that without losing any meaning, obviously. Especially if you have quite a few supercurriculars on your list, then you'll inevitably have to cut some out. And the ones that don't make the cut, as I said before, should go on your reference. You should tell your reference writing teacher about them. So prioritize the most impressive and important stuff for your personal statement, and also what works well together when you're forming those chains of activities. So how do you get feedback on your personal statement? Well, I actually made a list of people that I wanted feedback from specifically, and I actually wrote a template for a message I could send them, just politely asking for feedback. You want to get a varied and diverse feedback and opinions from many different people, but this does require your own level of judgment as well, because some of this advice will be conflicting, and this was kind of frustrating for me. I was like, this person is telling me that, what I've written here is good, and someone else is telling me that I should change it or remove it. And honestly, at some point you just need to say, I'm going to make my own choices too. Just hear everyone out, and at the end of the day, it's your personal statement. Just do what you think is best, but try and get other people's opinions, because you might be missing something kind of important. Ask everyone that you can. Ideally, start with your teachers, especially your subject teachers, but you can even ask, your family, your friends, your dog, anyone that's willing to help. Ask them, get their opinion, and just keep working on improving those bits that people think need improvement. Ideally, there'll be someone who is experienced in the subject itself, and even better if they're familiar with the UCAS process as well. One thing that I did that I would definitely recommend is just finding people on LinkedIn who are currently studying the course that you want to do, and just sending them a quick message saying, "Hi, I saw you were studying this at this university. I was wondering if you could have a quick look at my personal statement and give me some pointers to improve it." Do this like maybe 20, 30 times if you really want, and you'll probably get like a less than 50% response rate, but that's still really good. You've got loads of opinions from people who are currently doing the course and had a successful personal statement. So really invaluable feedback you get there. That'll probably be some of the best feedback you get, actually. And finally, some super important bonus extra points that I want to mention. What if you don't have any supercurriculars? The first thing I would do is just find a lecture on YouTube about your subject and watch it, maybe even make notes on it. then go watch a podcast and try some kind of project as well. Maybe it's writing, maybe you're coding, or whatever it is. Again, you've now just made your own chain of events, and it doesn't need to be some fancy competition, as I said before. You've just talked about how you've taken initiative to explore your own interests, and that's exactly what they're looking for. So now you have some supercurriculars, no need for any certificate or anything like that. Do one of those massive open online courses that I mentioned earlier for computer science. There's a great one called CS50, which is completely free and it's offered by Harvard University. You can write loads about what you learned and what you did as a result of doing that course online. You don't even need to do the whole thing, just do enough to talk about it. And just like that, you've got loads of content to talk about in your personal statement. And secondly, this is a great point from Akshar Patel's video. If you haven't seen his channel already, go check it out, I'll link in the description. You can actually DM UCAS on Instagram. You can ask them any question that you want about your application. If you need some advice or if you need to change something on your application, they are there during working hours. So you can just DM them, super easy way to get in touch with someone from UCAS themselves. The next point is if you're applying for a really competitive university, and especially if you're applying for a STEM course, as I did and as the majority of my friends did, please do not fall for the trap of, oh, I want to get into Cambridge, but I've heard that they don't read or care about the personal statement. Many top STEM universities do. I'll never know for sure, I guess, but I think one of the main reasons why I got an offer from Imperial was because I had a really strong personal statement. Honestly, I think it kind of made up for the fact that my admissions test was a bit weaker. Specifically with Cambridge and I guess Oxford, many colleges will read your personal statement very thoroughly. I personally applied for Queen's College, and literally half of the one interview that I had was a deep dive into my personal statement. They literally asked me to talk about almost every single part of my personal statement. Even for colleges that historically don't do their interviews like this, you never know when their processes change from year to year. Also, you're applying to 4 other universities who will care, and there's also no guarantee that you will even get an interview from Oxbridge if you're applying. So I think in any case, you should be trying to write as good of a personal statement as you can, spend time on it, and at the end you'll be quite proud of the work that you've produced. I think that's everything I wanted to mention in this video. If you have any questions or queries, or if I forgot to mention anything, please leave a comment and I'll try to respond to all the questions. But with that being said, best of luck with writing your personal statement. I hope it goes well. Remember to iterate and improve. Your first draft won't be very good, but it will get better. If you follow all the advice outlined in this video, I think you're guaranteed to write a banging personal statement. With that being said, keep an eye out for my next video where I go into my own personal statement. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.